Hello and welcome to UNA Forum Presents this time 57th San Francisco International Film Festival. We're extremely happy to present you two wonderful filmmakers who are going to be at the San Francisco International Film Festival this year. They're filmmakers for the film Overnighters and the Last Season. So we have Sara Dosa for the Last Season. Tell us a little bit about your film, Sara. It's been a while that you've been working on this film, and obviously this is going to be your directorial debut because you worked as a producer in some other films. So tell us about the film and your inspiration to go with this powerful story about the veterans, environment, and human rights issues.
Sure. So first, thanks so much for having me. My film is really about the story of two former soldiers, one who was a sniper in Vietnam and a Cambodian man who survived the Khmer Rouge. And their lives intersect in a very unexpected place in the middle of the Oregon woods in the wild mushroom hunting trade. So these two men, they bond over sharing stories of war, surviving war in Southeast Asia, and then end up adopting each other as father and son. So the film kind of explores their last mushroom hunting season together. And it's also kind of a meditation on memory, family, survival, nature. So it's been quite an adventure.
And we have Jasmina, who has the Overnighters. Obviously, the film was premiered in Sundance Film Festival, and it's now in the Bay Area. And obviously, just you're a documentary filmmaker from here, from the Bay Area. You grew up, you were in New York, you're back, and the film already has some great reception from the audience. And it's a very interesting story. It's obviously a combination of telling us about the American dream and the economy and jobs, but much more than that. It's also going to the religion, and obviously at the end of the film you're not going to reveal what happened, but there are a lot of interesting and changing stories in one wonderful film. So,
thank you. Yeah, the Overnighters is about desperate men and women from across America who've traveled to North Dakota to try to find work in the booming oil fields up there. There's a huge oil field in North Dakota, and it's become the place in America where you can find living wage work. And so there's been a mass migration of Americans. And the film is about a pastor, a Lutheran pastor in an oil boom town called Williston, who opens his church to help and to house hundreds of these desperate Americans who are really looking for a second chance. And his decision to help them, an act of Christian charity, puts him in conflict with his own congregation, with his neighbors and his community, and ultimately his own family. So the film explores what it really means to love thy neighbor.
And obviously the stories couldn't be told without the subjects of the films, and this is the most difficult thing for the documentary filmmakers, to get to the subjects. As much as you like the story or idea to make something interesting, obviously how you get to the subject. So Sarah, in your case, obviously, how did you find them? Sure. How did you find this very attractive and very deeply motivated to tell the stories to veterans, and obviously how you connect them?
Yeah, well, I first came to the story, I was in graduate school studying cultural anthropology, and I heard a lecture by the brilliant Professor Anna Singh, who really explores the world of the Oregon mushroom hunters, but through the lens of labor and capitalism. And I was just totally captivated by what she had to say, and ended up, to make a very long story short, working with her as a researcher. And she gave me some of the names of some of the people in her own work, but I hadn't met them yet. And it wasn't until I did a location scout with my producer that we rolled into this tiny town called Schmaltz. It's a population of 135 off this desolate freeway, kind of in the wilderness. And we go into the ranger station, and I start talking with the ranger about our idea for making a film about the Oregon mushroom hunters. And in the background, there's this woman who just kind of caught my eye, but she was just filing papers. And I mentioned one of Professor Singh's research subjects, this man named Coy. And the woman in the background just kind of pops her head up and says, "Coy's my son." And that was quite shocking because she's white and Coy is a Cambodian man, and that's something that doesn't normally seem to fit, especially in rural Oregon. So I ended up talking with her, and she told me this whole story about how she and her husband and Coy bonded over their stories of war, and ended up becoming a family. So it was kind of serendipity in a way. We just happened to be in the office right when she was filing papers, to hear about how this very unique family came together.
So let's see the clip from the documentary by Sara Dosa, The Last Season.
Mushroom helped me survive through hard time. When I was a young boy in Cambodia, my country fell down into the communist regime and the Khmer Rouge took over. My father was wounded by the communists and he passed away from the beginning of the war. In order to survive Khmer Rouge, you have to be able to adapt. We work as a slave labor and we don't have enough food to eat. Everybody got starved. I eat everything. I eat tadpole, I eat earthworm, I eat grubs, I eat everything. That's how I got to pick all kinds of mushrooms. And even here, it helped me earn my living.
So we just saw the clip from the film The Last Season, from the documentary which is going to be screened in the 57th San Francisco International Film Festival. Sara Dosa is director of this really interesting film which uses a mushroom as a metaphor in a sense. Obviously this is a process of reconciliation. It's a story about South Asia and mushroom is just, you can tell us,
Sure.
Sara.
So I was really drawn to the story. I'm drawn to stories of searches in general because when you set out to look for something, you often find something else. And in my film, mushrooms kind of occupy a couple metaphors, but the central one is about interconnection. The matsutake mushroom, which my protagonists are in search of, they have a symbiotic relationship with pine trees. And however, and it's underground, you can't see them. So the film itself is really about unexpected interconnections. It's about how these two men from very different walks of life end up becoming what each other needs in a very similar way to, you know, how the matsutake mushroom and pine trees can support each other. They're very different walks of life. And so the film is kind of about the search for the connections we always thought we needed in a way.
And that's actually, Jessie, the very similar idea in your film, connecting people from a totally different background. So these are people who are coming from all over the United States. We also have in your film a woman actually from San Francisco who is in North Dakota and actually trying to find a piece of American dream.
That's right, and I mean, it's really, people ask me, who are these people who make this journey to North Dakota? And it's America. I met men with PhDs from Cambridge, and I met people who never graduated from high school. Certainly many tradesmen who lost their jobs when manufacturing and housing busted. But you know, they go there, and actually many of the men who find their way to this church, well, they can't afford to rent an apartment or a room in Williston because it's got the highest market rents in America. In fact, this little oil boom town has got so many people with so much money, but there's not enough housing. And so people come to this church, and many of them actually are, I would say, really quite desperate and are running from, in some cases, criminal records, mistakes they've made, broken marriages, broken lives, looking for redemption and a second chance. And the pastor who, he's got a family, he's a native to Williston, and he takes them in. And they are very different people. And what's so moving, and what I found when I first went to the church and met Pastor Jay, was his connection, his emotional connection to these men, and I say men because it's really primarily men who make that journey, but a very powerful emotional connection, and that these were people who literally got off the bus that day, they have nothing, and they find him and they find this church, and that connection, that spark of human connection is what I saw with my camera, and what drew me into this story, not knowing where it would take me, but just knowing that there was something very profound happening in this place, and seeing what the pastor was risking in his own life and what these men were risking in their lives to come to this place.
So let's see the clip from the film The Overnighters.
Damage control. Keith is on this list. And by putting our church here as the address, I can tell you every neighbor is nervous tonight. Most merciful God, we ask your blessing upon the man whose names appear on the sex offender list. Some of those crimes are brutal. We ask, O Lord, that you would help them to know that they are not just what that label says they are. When we discovered that they had that status, we asked them to leave. Obviously, that raises a concern. We pray for the children that have suffered and been abused. We pray for the women that were not treated with respect. Please let your word comfort and guide them.
No. Nope.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, okay. It's okay. Okay, but
Nope.
just so you know, ma'am.
That's fine,
This
but
is ju-
I
okay,
don't want
that's
any
great.
part of any more of all the rigmarole. No.
I'm kind of sympathetic with somebody who just can't defend themselves. They're carrying burdens. Everybody is bearing a burden.
We saw the clip from the documentary The Overnighters by Jesse Moss, the film is going to be screened at the 57th San Francisco International Film Festival. So Jesse, obviously bringing the camera to this environment that you already have some disputes and questions, and it's always kind of intimidating, but building the trust between the pastor and the subject, it's probably easier for you. I heard that you actually spent, and it's that being part of the community for several weeks.
Yeah, so, well, I went up there by myself. I actually didn't have any funding or support, and I like to shoot. So I went up as a one-man band crew, and not really knowing what I would find, and actually not having a place to stay. And when I got to the church and I met Pastor Jay and I had talked over the phone, and he said, come and visit. And when I got there and I saw what was happening, I was quite compelled, but also I didn't have a place to stay, and I asked Jay, could I stay at the church? And he said, of course, you can. And so my way into this story was really quite ground level, and I slept among the men and got to know Jay and the subjects of my film. I follow several of the men through the course of the story over 18 months. And you know, not having a crew, working by myself, it's just a very intimate and a very flexible way to work, and I think the film goes to a really personal place in Jay's life and in the lives of these men, and I think the foundation for that journey is that initial period of working, of sleeping in the church, and really just being there and being totally available. And I think you can do exceptional work with a crew, but I just think that not having to worry about anybody else, just being able to be totally present in the moment allowed me to really follow my own instincts, and I think to make a very intimate and personal film. And this is a very intimate and personal story about, I think, an industry that is kind of monolithic and sort of overwhelming, and I wanted to make a very ground level story about human beings in this system, which is oil and energy extraction in North Dakota.
You obviously, both of you were in a situation to be in a very small community, and everybody, I'm sure the people knew about what you were doing, because obviously filming and being there for a while. So did you have any approach from the local reporters or journalists, or asking you, or can we just have a story about that and put in a newspaper? And what was your reaction as a filmmaker? This is sorry for both of you.
Sure. So for me, we weren't approached by any journalists at all. It was such a small town that everyone, the second we arrived there, people pretty much knew what we were doing. And we were very open with everyone about, you know, we would go into a store, buy something, people would ask us what we were doing. We were very upfront, and people were very curious, so word spread quite fast. So yeah, that's kind of was our experience. At first, it was challenging. A lot of people are very suspicious in the mushroom hunting community of outsiders, because people describe their mushroom patches as their bank accounts. And so, you know, cameras showing where, you know, the way it was described is like, would you give someone your numbers? No, of course not. Are you going to show where our patches are? Well, I don't know if we want you around. So it was difficult to build trust, but at the same time, we were just very open with people. We tried to act with reciprocity and respect, and we were welcomed in and built some very close friendships. So.
And just in your case?
Well, it's interesting. Over the time that I made the film, North Dakota and the oil boom became a bigger and bigger story, and so I would run into foreign journalists and people from national publications and news organizations, and I found that unnerving, because as a documentary filmmaker, I'm really used to following my own particular story and not having to worry about any other filmmakers or story journalists. But you know, I'd run into French TV crews, and I just found that a little, and I think it's sort of like being on the front lines of maybe a war where you're, you know, all these journalists have gone there to get a story, and you can't help but run into each other, because it's actually quite a small town. So I just tried to ignore them and kind of push that out of my mind. The other dimension, though, to the film is that it's partly about the local newspaper in this small town of Williston, which is something of a nemesis to Pastor Jay. The newspaper is kind of poking around his church, and they've gotten wind of the fact that there are ex-convicts sleeping there. And so I was fascinated by the role that the local paper plays in this particular story, but also in sort of life in a small town. And now they didn't care about me; they were just doing their job, and I was happy to be a fly on the wall. So kind of interesting to ignore the national media, pay attention to the local media, and.
But again, also in your stories, there's a lot of connection, family connection, and this is also a beautiful part of that you put your camera, is obviously camera as a witness, and making this connection between, in your case, Sarah, between two different worlds in a sense, but also very similar worlds, because obviously your subjects are both veterans, and they both know what the war means, and it's actually trying to make reconnection in a new family, in a sense.
Yeah, indeed. Koi, one of my protagonists, he lost his family to the Khmer Rouge, and for him, he said it's not quite like a widespread custom by any means, but it's very common in Cambodia and many places that survive, you know, tremendous loss through war, to seek out to rebuild family. There's kind of an anthropological term called fictive kinship, which describes this phenomenon. And so for Koi, yeah, he felt this bond with this family, and because Roger had survived war himself, and Roger spoke Khmer, he spoke Thai, he spoke Lao, because he fought in these contexts, and he was aware of many of the cultural traditions. And so when Koi went to them to ask to be, you know, their son, Roger already had a sense of understanding of what this meant, and he accepted. And so, so the film is, you know, really takes that as its point of entry. It's exploring how people can create a new family, a new livelihood, a new life, despite horrific violence.
And it's the same thing actually just in your film, because obviously they're becoming like a big family. It's a very interesting, again, some of them they're losing family, and then the other from the other side.
No, community and family are very strong themes in the film, and it's something that the men who've made this journey to this church find. They find a kind of kinship or community that sustains them, and they forge very powerful connections, not only with the pastor, but with other men. but it's something that the pastor fights hard for, which is the inclusion of these overnighters, that's what he calls them, into the local community, which fears them. And it really drives him. He wants them to be accepted, but the community looks at them with some trepidation. And I think the other kind of the untold story or dimension of oil and energy in America, and now that we have this migratory class of Americans that moves to find work in natural gas fracking or oil fracking, is that the price that those families pay when those men or women make that journey and leave their families behind. And that's what the film explores, is really how those decisions rip apart families and how the industry itself rips apart communities. So it does emerge as a very strong theme in the film.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, as a documentary filmmaker, you follow your subject, and then once you make a film, the film has to be seen and it has to be distributed and has to be seen also, I'm sure, in schools. So what are the plans for this film festival? Is one of the steps, but what are the other steps that you're going to use to promote and get the idea of obviously both topics close to the audience and particularly close to the younger people, because they have to see and then learn from both stories that there's a huge human rights story that we can all share. So, Sarah, in your case.
So for me, we're about to make our world premiere. I'm absolutely thrilled that I'll be at the San Francisco International Film Festival. And shortly after that, we're making our international premiere at Hot Docs in Toronto. And then we're going on to some festivals that I'm not allowed to announce yet, but I'll be thrilled for that to happen. Then, you know, of course, hope for theatrical, TV, kind of the other platforms. But it's really important to me to also have an outreach and engagement campaign that can really highlight kind of the human rights issues that are present in my film. For example, right now that there's a bill that's set to go before Congress about more mental health support for veterans. Right now, there's something estimated like 1,900 suicides from veterans this year alone. And so the numbers are staggering in terms of the lack of support that young men and women are coming, you know, the challenges that they face. And PTSD is a major theme in my film. Both my two main subjects, both are grappling with that, and that's the source of how they really came together and support each other. So I'm really hoping that my film can be used as a centerpiece of a wider campaign that raises issues about veteran mental health, and can also teach a younger generation about the Khmer Rouge and about the Vietnam War and Laos's Civil War. These are wars that are rarely heard about nowadays. So that's kind of the wider reach that I hope my film will have.
Wonderful. And just in your plan?
I'm very excited that the film has entered this phase of its life where we get to show it to audiences and talk about it. It's really provocative, and I didn't set out to make an advocacy film, but really to tell a story, and it's a really emotional and I think powerful human story. But it does leave people with a lot of questions, and so we premiered it at Sundance, and Pastor Jay has been a part of the public conversation around the film. So many questions raised about what it means to love thy neighbor, about this kind of new America that we live in, where people move to work, and what it does to families and communities. And so we're beginning that conversation out of Sundance. We've been doing some other festivals, San Francisco among them, my hometown, which is exciting. But we have a theatrical distributor, Draft House Films, which will be putting the movie in movie theaters across America in the fall. And we'll be doing a big campaign to support that release, and a lot of travel and conversation. And also, we're committed to really engaging one of the many questions provoked by the film is the question of affordable housing and how communities, not just Williston, North Dakota, which we might think is an anomaly, this strange oil boom town, but communities like Palo Alto, which actually have very similar problems. In fact, people sleeping in their cars, people who don't have a place to stay, who can't afford rent. These are not unusual problems, and I think the film provides a way to really think about these and some of the challenges that make solving these problems not simple. So that's what we're looking forward to, and then ultimately I think we have a PBS broadcast to look forward to.
So briefly, the social media is obviously helping us, so just what to use and how people can find you and how they can comment on the film.
They could find The Overnighters on our website, Overnighters Movie, but also we're on Facebook, The Overnighters film, and Twitter, of course. So social media has been a big part of our outreach, our conversation. I mean, it's where people are talking and where people are sharing, and we're on there every day looking at, getting the word out about where the film can be seen and what people are saying about the film, and actually having a conversation with people. I mean, I check Twitter, every time our film screens at a festival, I go online, I search Twitter to see what people have said about it, and whether it's good or bad, we love to know. So it's been an essential tool that, in the last 5 years, the world has changed since I made a documentary, and now I'm sort of happy to jump in and really have that conversation too.
Sarah, in your case?
Yeah, for me, since we haven't premiered yet, we've found social media to be very helpful in terms of seeding our audiences, and we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're /The Last Season Film, and our website is www.thelastseasonfilm.com, so people can follow us there. But it's been really interesting because we haven't, people haven't reacted yet, but we're finding a lot of anticipatory comments. People kind of all over the world, from Southeast Asia to Scotland to parts of the US, have kind of been inquiring about where they can see the film, and it's been exciting to drum up that kind of anticipation.
So what we wish you, obviously, that this film is going to be with so many people, and to come to the theaters, and obviously this is just one of the steps in this journey for the films. Also, we hope that you're going to have a great distribution, and also the school distribution is a part of the, I'm sure, deal that a lot of young people can see it. So again, those are two wonderful films, The Last Season and The Overnighters, that you can see at the 57th San Francisco International Film Festival. This is our program, UNA Forum Presents. Thank you so much for being guests in our studio, and we wish you all the best with your work. And thank you.